The wooden bench outside Johns Hopkins felt colder than the steel railings. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The scent of late-blooming cherry blossoms drifted through the May air. But all I could smell was antiseptic, sharp, sterile, and suffocating. Somewhere behind those glass walls, my husband, Jimmy Sullivan, was fighting for his life. Acute myeloid leukemia. Stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't offer hope, only a countdown. I had spent the past 6 months watching his skin turn paper yellow. His veins dark beneath translucent flesh. His once laughing eyes, those storm gray eyes, had dulled to the color of smoke. I had memorized the rhythm of the monitors, the soft hiss of oxygen, the way his chest rose and fell with borrowed air. And yet, no matter how much I braced myself, I wasn't ready to lose him. When Dr. Cohen said, "Without a bone marrow transplant in 3 weeks, he won't make it," I nodded, pretending I understood. But all I heard was the sound of the world collapsing quietly inside me. 6 months ago, we were arguing about baby names, Liam or Nora, mocking each other over coffee stains and takeout boxes. Now there would be no nursery, no midnight feedings, no laughter echoing down the hall. I pressed my forehead against the cool bench, whispering, "I'll be right back," as if saying it could make it true. My wedding ring felt heavy, like a promise I was failing to keep. The breeze carried the faint hum of sirens, the footsteps of strangers, and somewhere above it all, the truth I wasn't ready to face. I might have already said goodbye. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The air in the ICU was colder than anywhere else in the hospital. It always was. The hum of machines filled every inch of the sterile room, blending with the slow, uneven rhythm of Jimmy's heartbeat on the monitor. A low beeping sound, steady yet fragile, as if the machine itself feared silence. I paused at the doorway, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest beneath the white hospital blanket. The light above his bed glowed an icy blue, washing out what was left of his color. He looked small, smaller than I remembered, as if the illness had not only taken his strength but had shrunk his presence in the world. "Hey," I whispered, stepping closer. My voice trembled even though I tried to hold it steady. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, barely a flicker, and he smiled that weak, crooked smile I used to fall in love with every morning. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice thin as smoke. "Of course I am." I sat down beside him, taking his hand. His skin was cool, veins tracing fragile blue lines along the back of his palm. I rubbed it gently, as if I could warm him back to life. He tried to joke. "You didn't run away yet?" "Not yet," I whispered. "You're still stuck with me." He chuckled weakly, the sound dissolving into a shallow breath. The monitor beeped in time with his laughter, as if mocking the moment's fragility. I leaned closer and pressed my lips to his forehead. His skin smelled faintly of antiseptic and salt. "I'll be right back," I whispered. "Just need a minute, okay?" His fingers tightened slightly, the gesture more instinct than strength. "Promise. Promise." I forced myself to stand. Every step toward the door felt like betrayal. I wanted to turn around, to run back and hold him until time gave in. But something inside me, some desperate, trembling part that couldn't bear to fall apart in front of him, kept pushing me forward. As I stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The nurse at the station glanced up, offering me a sympathetic smile, the kind that says we both know what's coming, but I won't say it out loud. I nodded, barely meeting her eyes, and kept walking. The corridor smelled of bleach and quiet grief. I passed a father cradling a newborn in one room, a woman sobbing quietly into a phone in another. Life and death separated by thin glass and heavy doors. Johns Hopkins had a way of reminding you that hope was rationed, and some people got more than others. I needed air. I pushed open the side door near the stairwell, where the sterile smell gave way to the faint sting of cigarette smoke. 2 nurses stood huddled near the emergency exit, coats half-zipped, their laughter low and guilty. I wasn't supposed to be there, staff only, but I didn't care. Did you hear about the guy in ICU 7? One of them said, flicking ash into an old coffee cup. Which one? The leukemia case. Sullivan, I think. Poor guy's only 38. The other nurse took a drag and exhaled, the smoke curling into the dim fluorescent light. Yeah, that one. But I swear to God, he looks exactly like Ryan from Deep Creek Lake. The first nurse frowned. Ryan who? You know Ryan O'Connell. The rescue diver? Big guy, gray eyes, the scar on his chin. He used to date my cousin. She laughed softly. It's weird. Same jawline, same eyes. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were twins. The cigarette slipped from the first nurse's fingers, landing near her shoe. No way. You sure? I'm telling you. It's uncanny. I froze. For a second I thought I'd misheard them. My breath caught in my throat. The hum of the air vents faded. All I could hear was the pounding in my ears. Deep Creek Lake. 3.5 hours west. I had been there once years ago on a college camping trip. A place where fog kissed the lake at dawn and the mountains swallowed the sky. I remembered the water glinting like steel, the laughter of strangers, the silence of being far from everything. But the name wasn't what paralyzed me, it was the way they said he looks exactly like him. Exactly. My mind raced. Jimmy had no family, no records, no birth certificate, no relatives in the system. He had grown up in foster care, shuffled from one home to another. Every time he told me about it, he'd say it with a smile, like he was protecting me from the heaviness of his past. Just me and the universe, babe, he used to joke. The rest is paperwork. I turned slowly, my heart slamming against my ribs. My body felt detached, as if I were watching myself from outside. Watching a woman standing in a stairwell, gasping for breath she couldn't seem to find. What did you say his name was? One of the nurses asked again. Ryan O'Connell. Deep Creek Lake. The words echoed in my mind, over and over, until they blurred into a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I clutched the railing to steady myself. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the rest of their conversation. The metallic taste of panic filled my mouth. Could it be? No. Impossible. And yet, Jimmy's features, the sharp jawline, the gray-blue eyes, the faint dimple near his right cheek, they could belong to someone else. Someone out there. Someone alive. A spark flickered inside me, small and irrational but burning through the fog of despair. Hope. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and utterly illogical. Before I knew it, I was already moving. Down the stairs, through the empty corridor, the sound of my shoes echoing like a metronome for my racing heart. I didn't have a plan, just a single reckless thought repeating in my mind. What if he isn't alone in this world? What if he has someone who could save him? For the first time in months, the fear that had been drowning me shifted into something else. A wild, desperate determination. I didn't stop to think about the consequences. I didn't stop to breathe. All I knew was that I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not if there was even the slightest chance that those nurses were right. Because if they were, then maybe, just maybe, Jimmy's goodbye wasn't the end. I ran. My heart pounded like the alarms I imagined might start blaring any second. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly ahead, the fluorescent lights flickering as if warning me to stop. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I burst into the staff changing room, slamming the door behind me. The room smelled of detergent and cheap perfume, the kind that clung to every nurse's scrubs after a 12-hour shift. My reflection in the mirror looked foreign, hair matted to my forehead, eyes wide and trembling, white blouse stained with the day's exhaustion. I yanked off my coat and threw on a dark jumpsuit hanging on the rack, one I'd worn during emergency drills. My hands shook as I buttoned it up. Every motion was fueled by a strange mix of fear and focus. On autopilot, I reached into my locker, pulled out a photo of Jimmy, one of those small Polaroids we took at the fair 2 summers ago. He was holding a giant stuffed bear he'd won for me, grinning with cotton candy stuck to his cheek. My thumb brushed over his smile. I folded the photo and slid it into the front pocket of my jumpsuit, right over my heart. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. I froze. Someone coughed and then a cart rolled by. Silence again. My breath trembled as I exhaled slowly. In the corner of the locker room, the emergency key rack glinted under the dim light. I scanned the labels until I found it. Ambulance Unit 42. My pulse spiked. I reached out, hesitated for half a second, then snatched it. The metal was cold against my palm, heavy with consequence. I know this is wrong, I whispered to myself, but I can't lose him. Not like this. Every instinct screamed for me to stop, to think, to be rational. But love doesn't negotiate with reason. It burns through logic, leaving nothing but the will to keep someone breathing one more day. I slipped through the back corridor, keeping my head down, my ID badge swinging slightly with each step. The rain outside had turned furious, slamming against the windows like fists. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ambulance bay. My shoes splashed through puddles as I sprinted toward the nearest vehicle. The key slid into the ignition perfectly, almost too easily, and the engine roared to life. The sound sent a jolt through me, half terror, half adrenaline. As I pulled out of the bay, the security guard shouted something, but the rain swallowed his words. I didn't look back. My wipers screamed across the windshield, fighting the sheets of water that blurred the world into streaks of gray. I merged onto I-70, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. Jimmy was still alive for now. The hospital lights faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the storm. The road ahead stretched into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning that lit up the forested hills around me. I drove faster. 90 miles per hour. 95. 100. Hold on, Jimmy, I whispered into the storm. Just hold on. The rain was relentless, but my thoughts were louder, memories, fragments, prayers. The night we met in the ER, both of us interns trying to survive our shifts. The first time he made me laugh so hard I spilled coffee all over his scrubs. The day he proposed, slipping a ring into a latex glove just to make me laugh again. Now that same hospital was keeping him alive by a thread, and I was out here breaking every rule I'd ever followed to save him. By the time the green highway sign for McHenry Deep Creek Lake appeared through the mist, my eyes burned from staring into the rain. 3 hours had passed. My fuel gauge was nearly empty. My pulse hadn't slowed once. I pulled off onto a narrow road lined with pine trees, their branches dripping like black ink. The storm had softened into a drizzle, but thunder still rumbled somewhere beyond the mountains. At the edge of the lake, a flickering neon sign came into view. Honey Honey Bar. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, the silence inside the ambulance deafening after hours of wind and wipers. My body trembled as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the sharp edge of reality. What was I even doing? Walking into some bar in the middle of nowhere, chasing a rumor born from a nurse's cigarette break. It sounded insane. But then again, insanity was the only thing that had kept me alive these past few hours. I stepped out into the drizzle. The gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed the lot. Warm light spilled through the bar's windows, distorted by the rain. Inside, the low murmur of voices mixed with the clinking of glasses and a jukebox humming an old country song. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first: whiskey, fried food, and damp wood. A few locals turned to look at me, their faces lined with the kind of small-town suspicion reserved for outsiders. I walked to the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bartender, a tall man with a gray beard and a navy tattoo fading on his forearm, looked up from polishing a glass. "Evenin'. You look like you drove through hell," he said, not unkindly. "Something like that," I replied, reaching into my pocket. My hand trembled as I pulled out the photo of Jimmy and placed it on the counter. "Have you ever seen this man?" The man leaned closer, squinting under the yellow light. His brows furrowed. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "Ryan O'Connell." The name hit me like a heartbeat. "You know him?" He nodded slowly, still staring at the photo. "He works rescue. Deep diver. Pulls people out when they drown or get stuck under the ice. Lives down by Glendale Road, near the old marina. But," he paused, setting the glass aside, "you might want to be careful. Ryan don't take kindly to strangers." I swallowed hard. "I'm not here to hurt him." He studied me for a long moment, rainwater still dripping from my hair, exhaustion shadowing my eyes. Whatever he saw must have convinced him, because he gave a small nod. "Houseboat at the end of the dock. You can't miss it. Big one with a busted porch light." "Thank you," I whispered, slipping the photo back into my pocket. He called after me as I turned toward the door. "Ma'am, whatever this is, tread light. Ryan's been through his own kind of hell." I didn't answer. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped back into the rain. The air outside was cold, sharp, alive. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and followed the narrow, twisting road toward the lake. The windshield wipers beat in rhythm with my pulse. Every mile closer felt like moving toward a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to find, but I had already crossed the line of no return. "I know I'm committing a crime," I whispered to the darkness, "but I also know I can't lose him." Lightning flashed over the lake, illuminating the fog. For a brief second I saw it, the outline of an old dock, and at its end, a dim light flickering through the storm. And I pressed the pedal down, driving straight into it. The fog along the lake was thick as milk when I finally reached the marina. The rain had eased into a whisper, brushing against the dock planks in soft, rhythmic taps. The headlights cut through the mist just far enough for me to see the outline of an old houseboat rocking gently at the end. A single porch light flickered, just like the bartender said. I parked and stepped out, my boots sinking into the damp earth. My breath came out in visible clouds as I made my way down the creaking dock. Each step echoed across the still water, mixing with the distant rumble of thunder. He was already there. A man stood at the edge of the dock, hands in his jacket pockets, staring out at the lake as though it might answer questions too heavy for words. His build was lean but strong, his posture that of someone used to hard labor and silence. When he turned at the sound of my footsteps, my heart almost stopped. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It was Jimmy. Or rather, it was almost Jimmy. The same sharp jawline, the same deep-set blue eyes, but older somehow. Weathered. The face before me looked like a rougher version of my husband, carved from the same marble but molded by a harsher sculptor. "You must be Linda," he said quietly, his voice rough like gravel after rain. Big Mike called ahead. "Said you were looking for me." I froze, my throat closing. You look like Jimmy," he finished for me, eyes softening with something between pain and understanding. "Yeah, I get that a lot lately." He motioned toward the houseboat. "Come inside. You're soaked." The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil. The space was cluttered. Maps pinned to walls, scuba gear piled in corners, photos scattered across a wooden table. He handed me a towel, and I caught sight of a framed picture sitting beside the coffee pot. Two boys, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing in front of a weathered brick building. One of them had Jimmy's smile, the other Ryan's. I reached for it with trembling fingers. Where did you get this?" He studied me carefully before answering. "That's me and Jimmy. St. Mary's Orphanage, 1987. The room spun. My knees buckled and I caught the edge of the counter for support. Jimmy He never told me he had a brother." "That's because he didn't know," Ryan said, lowering himself into a chair. "They separated us when we were 4. Adoption agencies didn't want siblings back then. It was easier to place kids one by one." He exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the rain tapping the window. "I spent my whole life wondering if he made it out. A few years ago I found a record, James Sullivan, Baltimore. I came here once to this very hospital. They told me privacy laws prevented them from confirming anything. I let it go." My hands shook as I sat across from him. "He's in Johns Hopkins. Acute myeloid leukemia. The doctors said. There's almost no chance without a bone-marrow match." He turned sharply. "Leukemia." I nodded, the word catching in my throat. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. Then Ryan stood up, grabbed his jacket and said simply, "Let's go." "Go where?" "To save him." I blinked. "You don't even know if you're—" "I know." He cut in, voice steady. "And if there's even a 1 in a million chance, I'm taking it." The rain picked up again as we stepped outside, sheets of silver slicing through the darkness. Ryan's old pickup was parked nearby, its headlights already on. We drove off the dock and back onto the winding road, the wipers slashing furiously across the windshield. The miles blurred into a strange mix of silence and fragments of confession. He told me about the years after St. Mary's, how he bounced between foster homes, how their mother had overdosed before she could reclaim them. His file was sealed after that. Every birthday, I used to sit by the water and wonder if my brother was looking at the same sky. he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I told him about Jimmy. His goofy laugh, his stubborn optimism, the way he once said he'd rather die trying to save people than sit by and watch. Ryan gave a faint smile. Sounds like something I would have said. The clock on the dashboard blinked 3:37 a.m. as the Baltimore skyline came into view through the rain. My phone buzzed, a call from the hospital. I hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Sullivan? It's Dr. Patel. Your husband's condition is deteriorating. His white count's crashing and he's septic. If we don't get a compatible donor soon. We have one, I said, voice shaking. We're on our way. We burst through the hospital entrance, soaked to the bone. The nurses at the desk froze when they saw us. Two men who could have been the same person walking side by side. Dr. Patel blinked, his eyes wide. What in God's name? Test him, I said. Now. Within minutes, Ryan was whisked into the lab. The fluorescent hallway buzzed overhead as I paced outside, each second stretching longer than the last. My palms were cold, my heart hammering against my ribs. An hour later, Dr. Patel came out, papers in hand, disbelief painted across his face. 12 out of 12 HLA loci. It's a perfect match. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears spilling before I could stop them. Ryan didn't react, just nodded once and said, When do we start? But Dr. Patel hesitated. There's a complication. Jimmy's gone septic. His organs are under strain. If we don't stabilize him, we can't perform the transplant safely. How long? Ryan asked. Hours. Maybe less. Ryan's jaw tightened. Then we don't wait. Ryan, I began, but he shook his head. Your husband's my brother. I've waited 30 years to find him. I'm not waiting another hour to save him. The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse, then nodded briskly. Prep the OR. As they rushed down the corridor, Ryan turned back to me. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind his steady eyes, but also peace, the kind born of purpose. If something happens, he said quietly, tell him I'm sorry I didn't find him sooner. I caught his hand, gripping it tight. Don't you dare talk like that. He smiled faintly. Guess that runs in the family. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white doors and sterile light. I sank into a chair outside the surgical unit, my body trembling. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and rain-soaked coats. Every clock tick was torture. I thought of the photo in my pocket, the two boys before St. Mary's side by side, unaware that life would rip them apart. Now, decades later, one was fighting to live, and the other was risking everything to give him that chance. The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the world into silver streaks beyond the glass. I pressed my forehead against the cold wall and whispered, Please, just let one miracle happen tonight. Behind those closed doors, two brothers, once divided by fate, were finally bound by blood again. And as the surgical lights flickered on, I realized something profound. Sometimes, love doesn't come back the way you expect it to. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger who looks just like the one you're losing, and saves them anyway. The operating room smelled of steel and antiseptic. Cold, sterile, merciless. Yet beneath the blinding white light, there was something almost sacred happening. A kind of quiet devotion no words could capture. Ryan sat upright on the surgical table, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor as the medical team prepared the instruments. He had refused full anesthesia. I want to stay awake, he'd said firmly. If he's fighting for his life, I should feel it too. Dr. Patel tried to reason with him, but Ryan didn't budge. The compromise was a local anesthetic, just enough to dull the sharpest edges of the pain. But not all of it. Not nearly enough. From the observation window, I stood frozen, my hand pressed against the glass. The reflection staring back at me didn't look like me anymore. Pale, trembling, eyes swollen from sleeplessness and tears. Behind me, the heart monitor from Jimmy's room echoed in rhythmic beeps through the intercom. Every sound felt like it was counting down. When the first needle pierced Ryan's hip bone, he didn't flinch. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, sweat beading along his forehead. The doctor murmured something to him, maybe telling him to breathe, but Ryan just nodded silently, his gaze steady. His blood, the same blood that had once pulsed in Jimmy's veins before fate split them apart, was now being drawn out, cell by cell, to save him. I couldn't stop the tears. They came quietly, blurring the edges of the world until all I could see was the light reflecting off the stainless steel and the slow drip of crimson that symbolized both pain and redemption. At one point, Ryan looked up. Through the glass, his eyes met mine. And in that single look, I understood everything he wasn't saying. It's worth it. He's worth it. I pressed my hand harder against the glass, whispering, "Thank you." Though I wasn't sure if he could hear. The extraction went on for hours. The monitors beeped steadily. The nurses moved like shadows, their faces solemn and focused. One of them whispered something about how rare it was. Two strangers who shared not just matching DNA but matching strength. And then I realized something. Jimmy and Ryan weren't strangers at all. They were two halves of the same story finally coming full circle. As Ryan's blood filled the collection bags, the transfusion lines were prepped for Jimmy in the next room. The doctors called it a hematopoietic miracle. A perfect donor found against all odds. But to me it was simpler than that. It was one brother bleeding to bring the other back to life. Somewhere beyond the sterile walls, dawn began to rise. Pale light crept through the narrow window, painting the room in soft gold. It was the first sunrise I'd seen in days, and somehow it felt like a promise. Ryan's breathing slowed. The color drained from his face, his strength ebbing as the final samples were drawn. When the nurse asked if he wanted to stop, he shook his head weakly. "Finish it," he murmured. "Make sure he gets what he needs." When they finally removed the needle, his shoulders slumped forward, body trembling with exhaustion. The nurse caught him before he fell. I rushed into the room the moment they gave permission. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the light, but his eyes were still alive, calm, unwavering. "Ryan," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "You didn't have to do that without anesthesia." He smiled faintly. "You think pain scares me? I spent my whole life not knowing if my brother was dead or alive. A few hours of pain, that's nothing." I couldn't hold back anymore. My tears fell freely onto the floor between us. "You saved him," I said. Ryan reached out, his fingers brushing mine. "No," he said quietly. "He saved me. Gave me something to live for." Then his hand went limp as they wheeled him out for observation. Across the hall, the transplant began. Jimmy's body lay still, hooked up to machines and tubes that blinked and beeped like a digital heartbeat. I stood at the window again, my heart suspended between two worlds, one bleeding, one receiving, two lives tied together by the same fragile thread. In that sterile theater, the impossible happened. Two bloodlines, long separated by fate, began to merge again. Hours later, when the lights dimmed and the surgeon stepped out, I knew before anyone said a word. The operation had worked. When Jimmy finally opened his eyes, it was afternoon. The winter sunlight spilled across the white sheets, soft and forgiving. I sat beside his bed, half afraid to breathe. His lips parted, voice hoarse but alive. "Linda." I choked on a sob. "I'm here." He blinked, his gaze unfocused. What happened?" Before I could answer, the door opened and Ryan stepped in. He moved slowly, still weak, but there was color in his face now. For a moment, Jimmy just stared. Confusion flickered, then disbelief. Am I dreaming?" Jimmy whispered. Ryan smiled, a tired, gentle curve of his lips. "No dream, little brother." Jimmy's eyes widened. "Brother?" Ryan walked closer and took his hand. "Yeah, you have one now." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was sacred, full of everything words couldn't say. Tears rolled down Jimmy's cheeks as he squeezed Ryan's hand, his voice trembling. "I thought I was alone in this world." "Not anymore," Ryan said. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, spilling gold over the hospital courtyard. Nurses paused to look up, as if the world itself had exhaled. Weeks passed. Jimmy grew stronger each day. The doctors called his recovery statistically remarkable. I called it what it truly was, a miracle written in blood and brotherhood. When discharge day finally came, the air felt different, lighter. The hallway smelled of flowers and coffee instead of antiseptic. Jimmy sat in his wheelchair, his hair just starting to grow back, sunlight catching the edge of his smile. Ryan walked beside him, carrying the discharge papers and a small duffel bag. He looked like he'd been through hell and back, and somehow come out whole. "You know," Jimmy said, glancing up at him, "you don't have to go back to the lake." Ryan shrugged. "Didn't plan to." I figured I'd stick around for a while. I smiled. You mean live with us? He grinned. Only if your cooking's better than hospital food. Jimmy laughed for the first time in months, a real laugh, the kind that filled the air like music. When we walked out of the hospital together, the three of us, I realized something. Sometimes families aren't born, they're found through pain, through loss, through the courage to love again. Ryan paused by the parking lot, looking up at the sky. You feel that? He asked. What? I said. The air, he said softly. It doesn't feel like goodbye anymore. And as the wind brushed past us, warm and alive, I knew he was right. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of three hearts learning how to beat in the same rhythm. Finally, after a lifetime apart. That Thanksgiving, the house glowed with the warmth of three people who shared the same last name, Sullivan. Jimmy carved the turkey while Ryan poured the wine, their laughter blending with the soft crackle of the fireplace. From the window, I watched them on the porch later that night, their silhouettes framed by the amber light, two brothers finally whole. Sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. They come from a whispered rumor, a reckless drive through the rain, and a brother you never knew existed. Family isn't where we're born. It's where we're found. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every woman who ever drove into the storm to save someone she loves.